My son-in-law told the doctor I was not his responsibility. Those were his exact words. Not his responsibility. And my daughter, standing right beside him in that hallway, said nothing. I know, because Dr. Reeves told me himself 3 days after I woke up. He sat in the chair beside my bed the way people sit when they are about to say something they wish they didn't have to say. He folded his hands on his knees. He looked at the window first, then at me. Your daughter was contacted the night you came in, he said. We explained the situation. We told her it was serious. I waited. She said she'd try to make it. She never came. I stared at the ceiling tiles above me, counting the water stains because I needed something to do with my eyes. 38 years I'd worked the line at a plant in Greensboro, North Carolina, breathing that air. Coming home with grease under my fingernails, pouring every dollar I had into raising that girl right. I'd paid for her wedding. I'd helped them put the down payment on their house in Cary. I'd watched their kids on weekends so they could go on trips I never got to take. And when I was lying in a hospital bed with a burst appendix that had turned septic, when the surgeon told them I might not survive the night, my daughter had said she'd try to make it. She never came. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But something in me went very still instead, the way a pond goes still right before it freezes over. Cold and quiet and hard. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments. I want to know you're out there. The pain had woken me 2 nights before all of this, a tightening in my lower right side that I'd tried to walk off. I'd made myself a cup of tea. I'd sat in my recliner thinking it was gas, thinking it would pass. It didn't pass. By 4 in the morning, I was on the floor of my kitchen in Greensboro, my phone just out of reach, sweating through my shirt. I dragged myself to it. I called 911. I did not call my daughter first because I didn't want to scare her. That's the kind of fool I was. The paramedics got there in 6 minutes. The surgeon later told me another hour and it would have been a different story. So I owed my life to strangers who showed up, not to my own blood. I'd been in the hospital 3 days before I was coherent enough to understand what was happening around me. The infection had been bad. They'd put me on strong antibiotics, fluids, the works. I remember bits and pieces of those first days. A nurse named whoever adjusting my IV. The sound of a cart in the hallway, light changing in the window from gray to gold to gray again. What I don't remember is my daughter walking through that door. Because she never did. When Dr. Reeves finished telling me what he told me, I asked him one question. Did she ask how I was? He hesitated just long enough to give me the answer without words. She asked how long the recovery would typically take, he said carefully. I think she was trying to plan. My daughter was trying to plan around my near death like it was a scheduling conflict. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the trees along the hospital parking lot were just starting to bud. It was late March. I'd always loved that time of year in Carolina. That particular green that comes in fast after the gray of winter. So bright it almost doesn't look real. Clara had loved it too. My wife. 22 years we had together before the cancer took her, and there wasn't a spring that passed that I didn't think of her standing in our backyard with her coffee, just watching those trees come alive. Clara would have been here. She would have slept in that chair beside my bed. She would have argued with the nurses about my diet and embarrassed me, and I would have loved every second of it. But Clara was gone, and our daughter, the girl we'd raised together, the one I'd stayed up nights worrying about and praying over and loving more than I knew how to say, had not come. I reached over to the bedside table and touched the small wooden cross I kept in my jacket pocket. Clara had given it to me the last Christmas. She was healthy enough to shop. I'd carried it every day since. I held it in my palm and felt the worn edges of it, smooth from years of handling. I wasn't going to let go. Not yet. The call I made from that hospital bed was to a man named Gilbert. Gil and I had worked together for 11 years at the plant and then stayed friends after we both retired. He wasn't a fancy man, drove a 10-year-old pickup, made his own barbecue sauce, never said more than he needed to, but he was solid in the way that some people are solid. The kind of solid that holds up when everything else shifts. He answered on the second ring. "You're alive," he said. "Not a question." "Barely," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. "She didn't come, Gil." Silence on his end. Then, "I know. Shirley called me when she couldn't reach you." Shirley was my neighbor. 70 years old, grew up in Alabama, made the best sweet potato pie I'd ever tasted. She'd seen the ambulance and had been trying to track me down ever since. She came and sat with me, Gil said. Tuesday said she'd come back. A stranger and a neighbor. That was who showed up. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Name it." "I need you to call Robert Haynes." Robert was my attorney, the man who'd handled my will after Clara passed. Quiet man, competent, had an office downtown on Elm Street that still had wood paneling from the 70s. "Tell him I need to see him as soon as they let me have visitors." Gil didn't ask why. He just said, "I'll call him today." I hung up and lay back against the pillow. The IV in my arm pulsed with each drip. Above me, the fluorescent light hummed. I looked at the ceiling and thought about what I was about to do, and I did not feel angry exactly. Anger had burned through me somewhere in those first hours after Dr. Reeves told me what he told me. What was left now was something quieter and colder and much more certain. They think they know how this ends, I thought. They don't. My daughter's name is Renata. She is 41 years old. She married a man named, and I will not give him the dignity of his name, a man I will call my son-in-law, because that is all he is to me now. A title, not a person. He sold insurance. He was good at it. He had a handshake that made you feel like you'd just been sized up and found acceptable, and eyes that watched your face when you spoke, not because he was listening, but because he was calculating. I had never entirely trusted him, but Renata loved him, and I loved Renata. So I smiled at the cookouts and handed over the checks when they asked and told myself I was being too hard on him. I wasn't being too hard on him. 3 days after I was stable enough to sit up, Robert Haynes came to see me. He was 60-something, silver-haired, wore the same kind of brown loafers he'd worn every time I'd seen him since 1998. He pulled up the chair beside my bed, set his briefcase on his knee, and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Gilbert told me what happened," he said. "Then you know why I called." He nodded slowly. "You want to change the will." "I want to change everything." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. He uncapped his pen. "Tell me what you have in mind." I told him. I talked for 20 minutes straight, laying it out the way I'd laid it out in my head during those long hospital nights. The house, a 3-bedroom ranch I'd owned free and clear since 2009, was currently set to go to Renata. The savings account, the retirement fund, the small portfolio of stocks I'd built up carefully over 30 years. All of it had her name on it. I'd set it up that way after Clara died because Renata was our only child, and it had seemed right. It had seemed like what a father does. That was before I understood that what I'd built could be looked at as simply a number my son-in-law had probably already calculated. "I want to leave the house to Shirley Beaumont," I told Robert. "My neighbor, she has grandchildren she's raising on her own. It'll give them stability." Robert wrote without expression. "The retirement fund, I want to split it. Half to Greater Greensboro Habitat for Humanity. Half to the scholarship fund at my old high school in Reedsville." He wrote, "The stock portfolio goes to my church. They've been talking about building a community center for 15 years and never had the money." He looked up, and Renata. I was quiet for a moment. "I'm leaving her a letter." Robert held my gaze. He was too professional to say anything, but I saw something in his face, not pity exactly, but recognition. Like he'd sat beside enough beds to know that what I was doing was not reckless or cruel, but simply true. "I can have documents prepared," he said. "We'll need to get them properly witnessed and notarized. Given your situation, I can arrange for a notary to come here." "How soon?" "End of the week." "Do it." He clicked the pen closed and looked at me steadily. This is a significant decision, Hugh. Take the time you need. Hugh. That was my name. Hugh Mercer of Greensboro, North Carolina, retired machinist, widower, father of one. A man who'd spent 64 years on this earth trying to do right by people. I turned the wooden cross over in my palm. I've had plenty of time, I said. This is what I want. Renata called on a Thursday evening. I was eating the dinner the hospital had brought. Chicken that tasted like it had been boiled in regret. Green beans that have given up. When my phone lit up on the tray beside me, I looked at her name on the screen for a long moment. I answered, Daddy. Her voice was careful, controlled. She was using the voice she used when she wanted something, a voice that softened all the edges. How are you feeling? I've been so worried. Have you? I said. Of course. You know how crazy things have been. Deshawn's been out of town for work and the kids have been... It's been a lot. I was going to come this week, I promise. Renata. She stopped. The surgeon told you I might not make it through the night, I said. I kept my voice level. He told you that directly, and you told him you'd try. Quiet. A long, careful quiet. That's not exactly how it... Daddy, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Deshawn thought maybe we should wait and see. Deshawn thought you should wait and see. It's not like that. What is it like then? I said. Not shouting, not breaking, just asking. Because from where I'm lying, your husband told my doctor I wasn't his responsibility, and you agreed with him by not being here. Her voice shifted. I heard the shift coming before it arrived, that particular tightening that meant we were done with the soft version. You don't understand what it's like, she said. You never did. You sit in that house alone and you have no idea the pressure we're under. The mortgage, the kids' school, Deshawn's. I helped you buy that house, I said quietly. Silence. I want you to take care of yourself, I said. I mean that genuinely. But I also want you to understand something, and I need you to hear it clearly. Things are going to be different from here on. You'll understand what I mean when the time comes. What does that mean? The careful voice was gone now. Daddy, what are you doing? Getting better, I said. Good night, Renata. I set the phone face down on the tray and looked out the window at the parking lot lights coming on one by one in the early dark. My chest hurt, not from the surgery, but from that hollow place that opens up when something you loved finally shows you its true shape. I'd raised a daughter. I didn't know when I'd lost her. Gil came to see me on Saturday, bringing a thermos of decent coffee and a paper bag of biscuits from the place on Lee Street that I'd been eating at since I was 30 years old. He sat in the chair beside my bed and poured coffee into the thermos lid for me without being asked. We sat there for a while not saying much. Robert came, he finally said. Thursday. Documents are being drawn up. He nodded, turning his own cup in his hands. You sure? I'm sure. He was quiet again. Then, Hugh. Deshawn's been calling around, my son told me. Deshawn's been asking about what you've got. House, savings. He's asking people. I wasn't surprised, but something in my jaw tightened anyway. He's already counting it. Looks that way. I drank the coffee. It was good coffee, the real kind, dark and slightly bitter. I thought about Deshawn and that insurance office of his, with his handshake and his calculating eyes, adding up my years of work like it was already his. Let him count, I said. Gil looked at me sideways, that particular look he had when he thought something was either very smart or very stupid and hadn't decided which yet. He's going to be very surprised, I said. Gil's face shifted into something slow and satisfied, the way it did when the Tar Heels pulled ahead in the final minutes. He raised his thermos lid. I raised mine. We didn't need to say anything else. The notary came on a Wednesday, a young woman with a briefcase and sensible shoes who shook my hand and told me her name and proceeded to handle the whole business with complete professional calm, as though she witnessed old men rewriting everything they'd built in hospital rooms every single day. Maybe she did. Robert was there too, standing near the window in his brown loafers. I signed every page with a steady hand. My ribs ached, and my arm was still tender from the IV, but my hand was steady. When it was done, Robert slid the documents into his briefcase and looked at me. "It's done," he said. "Airtight." I nodded. "Do you want me to send any notification?" "No," I said. "They'll find out when they find out." He nodded, snapping the briefcase shut. The young notary gathered her things. They both said goodbye. The door closed behind them, and the room went quiet. I leaned back against the pillow and closed my eyes. I held the wooden cross in my right hand. I thought about Clara. I thought about the spring she'd planted tomatoes in the backyard and how she'd been so proud of those tomatoes, how she'd brought them to the neighbors like they were rare things because for her they were things she'd grown herself from almost nothing. I'd grown things too, and I'd known somewhere under everything that some of what I'd grown had gone wrong. I'd been too soft, too generous when what was needed was honesty. I'd handed my daughter everything she asked for because it was easier than the conversation we should have had years ago, and she'd learned from that, learned that I would always come through, always provide, always absorb whatever she didn't want to deal with. I had done that. Part of this was mine to own. But I was 64 years old, and I had, by the grace of God and 6 minutes of paramedic response time, survived something that should have killed me. And I was going to spend whatever years I had left doing something that mattered. They discharged me on a Friday afternoon. Shirley was waiting in the pickup lane in her old Buick, wearing a yellow cardigan and a look that said she had a casserole ready at home and would brook no arguments on the subject. She was right on both counts. I got into the car slowly, my body still unfamiliar to me in the way bodies are after they've been through something serious. She pulled out of the hospital lot without fanfare. "You look skinny," she said. "Hospital food." I made a chicken and rice. None of that hospital business. "Yes, ma'am." She drove. The trees along the highway were full green now. 2 weeks past those first fragile buds I'd watched from my window. The world had kept going while I was lying in that bed. Of course it had. The world didn't pause for any of us. "Renata's called me twice," Shirley said, not looking at me, "asking about you." "What did you tell her?" "That you were recovering fine and she ought to come see for herself." A pause. "She hasn't." I watched the trees go by. "She won't?" Shirley didn't say anything to that. She was too wise a woman to offer comfort that wasn't real. We pulled into my street, and when we passed Renata's old room window, I looked away out of habit, and then caught myself and looked back. Just a window. Just a room. Just a house that was mine and that I had the right to decide the future of. That felt like something. 2 weeks later, I drove myself to Robert's office for the last time on this particular matter. He walked me through the final paperwork, made sure I understood every provision, answered the 3 questions I had. Then we sat for a moment in the quiet of his office, the afternoon light coming through the Venetian blinds in long stripes. "You know," Robert said, leaning back, "in 30 years of practice, I've seen a lot of people come in here angry and rewrite everything, and then come back 6 months later wanting to undo it. I've also seen people come in here clear-eyed and purposeful and never look back." He studied me. "You fall in the second category." "I know what I'm doing," I said. "I believe you." I drove home. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the back porch in the afternoon sun, in the chair where Clara used to sit with her coffee on spring mornings. The yard needed work. The flower beds she'd kept had gone wild and weedy in the years since she was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I thought I might do something about that. Plant some things. Grow something. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Deshawn's number. I stared at it for 1 ring, 2 rings, then set it face down on the armrest and let it go to voicemail. Whatever he thought he was calling to arrange, whatever he'd calculated and planned, he was about to find out that the numbers didn't add up the way he'd thought. Not my house, not my savings, not my life's work. I picked up the phone again and dialed Gil. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Feel like barbecue?" I said. Always, he said. Anywhere specific? Somewhere I have to drive to, I said. Somewhere worth the trip. He laughed. Now that's the humor, sir, I know. I set the phone down and looked out at the yard, at the tangled flower beds and the old oak at the back that had been there longer than the house had. A mockingbird was going through its entire repertoire up in the branches, cycling through a dozen stolen songs, making them its own. I had a lot of years behind me. Whatever was in front of me, I intended to use it. The coffee was warm in my hands. The sun was doing what spring sun does in Carolina, generous and unhurried, like it had all the time in the world. So did I. I keep thinking about that wooden cross, the way it felt in my palm those first nights in the hospital, worn smooth from years of handling, warm from my skin. Clara gave it to me, and when everything else felt like it was dissolving, that small thing was solid. I don't think what happened to me was random. I think the life I'd been living had been building toward that hospital room for a long time, and I just hadn't been paying close enough attention to see it. I'd confused generosity with wisdom. I thought giving my daughter everything she asked for was love. And maybe part of it was. But somewhere in there I'd also been avoiding the harder thing, the conversation, the boundary, the honest moment where a father says to his child, "This isn't right, and I won't pretend otherwise." I took the easy road for years, and the easy road led me to a bed where I almost died alone. That's not fate. That's cause and effect. Actions accumulate. Choices compound. Renata didn't become the woman who stood in that hallway and said nothing overnight. She became that woman slowly, over years of being told yes when the honest answer was no. I had a hand in building the person who failed me. Owning that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I think it matters, not to punish myself, but because you can't actually change anything you won't look at straight. What I found in that hospital was something I hadn't expected. I found that I still had a spine. After months of convincing myself I was just being a good father, just being supportive, just keeping the peace, I found out that when I was backed into a corner with nothing left to lose, I knew exactly what was right, and I had the will to do it. Gil came with biscuits and decent coffee and didn't ask foolish questions. Shirley drove across town on a Tuesday just because she'd seen an ambulance. Robert Haynes put on his brown loafers and came to witness me rebuild something from a hospital room. Those people showed me what loyalty actually looks like. Quiet, practical, showing up without being asked. I'm not angry at Renata. I want to be clear about that. There's a grief there that I think will stay with me the rest of my life. The grief of a parent who loves a child they can no longer reach. But grief and enabling are different things, and I spent too long treating them like they were the same. What I chose, the house, the savings, the scholarship fund, the community center money, none of it was revenge. It was just me finally being honest about what I valued and who had actually earned my trust. Hugh Mercer. The retirement gift, the down payment, the restaurant loan. The endless yes, that man is gone. The man sitting on this back porch, watching a mockingbird work through its songs in that old oak, is someone who finally decided that his own life was worth protecting. I think that's what they don't tell you when you get older. Your life is still yours, right up until it isn't. And every day you have it, you get to decide what it means. I'm going to plant something in those flower beds this spring. Clara would have wanted that.